Just checking everything. Okay. Hello and welcome everyone for the digital book launch of Naima Rashid's Sum of Worlds, published by Yoda Press. And I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome Arpita and Naima. So welcome both of you.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
I'd like to begin with the introductions, and I'll go first with you, Naima. So Naima Rashid is an author, poet, translator who works between Urdu, Punjabi, French, and English. Her work has been longlisted for National Poetry Competition and Best Small Fictions. Her published translations include critically acclaimed translations of works by Ali Akbar Natik, Nola Kikoti, published by Penguin India in 2023, and Parveen Shakir's Defiance of the Rose, published by Oxford University Press in 2019, and a joint translation from French and, excuse my pronunciation, but Chicani's Les Fugitives 2023. Her most recent work is a poetry collection, Sum of Worlds, published by Yoda Press in 2024. Her work and views have been widely published internationally, including in Wild Court, Poetry Birmingham, The Scores, and Asymptote. She has conducted translation workshops with Shadow Heroes and will be conducting one with Bristol Translation this year, 2025. At present, she is working on her short story collection and novel. Welcome, Naima.
Thank you, Sabina. An absolute pleasure to be here.
Arpita.
Hi,
Arpita.
hi, Smith.
Hi, Arpita. Arpita Das is an alumna of St. Stephen's College, Delhi University, and the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, for which she received the Felix Scholarship. She is the founder, publisher of the award-winning independent publishing house based in New Delhi, Yoda Press. As associate professor, practice writing, she teaches the publishing seminar to senior students of creative writing at Ashoka University, and a foundation course called Introduction to Critical Thinking to first-year students. In the past, she helped set up the Word Lab at the Indian Institute of Human Settlements in Bangalore and led the SAGE School of Publishing courses at various universities and institutions across India. Arpita writes often on book culture, publishing, popular culture, gender, and bibliotherapy for various periodicals and platforms. She is also the editor of South Asia series at Melbourne University Publishing. So welcome both of you. I'd like to begin this session from a publishing aspect. I'll go with you, Naima, first. What was the journey all about? How did you embark upon that journey?
So Sabine, this book, the manuscript for the book was finished in 2017. The first draft was finished in around 2017. I thought it was finished, being a naive, amateur, overconfident author. I thought it was done and ready, but it wasn't. And I started pitching with that to several publishing houses. Obviously, I didn't know at that point that the manuscript wasn't ready. I also was very naive about where to pitch a poetry manuscript. So I got some rejections, and then I let it be for some years. In 2019, my other translation work that I was publishing on, working on, which was also verse translation, Parveen Shakir ka, that was published. Or uske baad, I was on आपका जो Women in Literature Festival का एक panel, feminism पे that you were moderating. उसमें Arpita was on the panel. Sasha, Ashia Sattar, Annie Lanjana Bhomik, if you remember that panel. which
Yes.
got pretty volatile and interesting towards the end. So उसपे I met Arpita and I had followed Yoda Press के titles मगर मैं इनके non-fiction or translation के titles follow करती थी. So after the session I looked up and they had a poetry line as well. So I got in touch after that and then things took a shift from there.
The rest is history.
Indirect.
Arpita, yeah,
It's thanks to you.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It began with your event, which is always such a lovely event to be part of. And I've got to know so many wonderful writers and literators at your panels by being part of your panels. And I think when Naima sent me the manuscript, I got back to her very soon after that because for me, I mean, we've always at Yoda Press had a list of poetry books, of poetry titles. We probably don't publish more than two a year because, as everyone knows, poetry is hard to market. Um, but at the same time, it's something that we are very committed to. So we want to keep sort of, publishing poetry every year, keep it consistently there as part of the list. And so I suppose we wait. I don't think we actively go looking for poetry titles. Poetry titles, the right ones of always seem to find their way to us. And that's exactly what happened with Naima's as well. Yeah.
So if you can also tell me, as a reader and as a teacher, as a professor, how do you find Naima's work?
So, I mean, what was really, I'll tell you first what we sort of look for, or rather, what we wait to see before we make that decision that this is um, a title we want to include in our list. And I'm saying we because any one of the editorial people in the team might come across, somebody might write to them and they might be the first people to see the uh, volume. I think for us, for all our titles across the list, the political is personal and the personal is political, is very, very real. So we look for that, as I said, across titles. We also look for that in any poetry title that we publish. And the second thing I think we look for is something much more perhaps difficult to uh, explain in words. It's a voice that takes us by surprise, or a voice that kind of, doesn't have to be the entire volume, but there have to be some verses in that collection that has all of us kind of agog and make all of us sit up and say, oh, this is so real, or this is so epiphanic. And so that's the sort of thing we look for. So it has to be sort of a combination of these two things. And I think, not I think, I know, because across all our poetry titles, these are the things we look for. And when we looked at Naima's collection, immediately that was the general consensus, that there was this sense of, very clearly laying out um, that the personal is political, of course, through the verses. But at the same time, there was an intimacy, and there was also feistiness. There was also a certain amount of irreverence. There were these really short poems, like 2-line poems. And I remember I laughed out loud a couple of times while reading some of them because they were so fab and so kick-ass and so sort of like, irreverent. And yet they were important. Like they said something very clearly to me. And and they were very much in the feminist vein. And I immediately empathized. I immediately sort of felt they spoke to me, the verses. And then I shared the manuscript with my two two of my editorial colleagues. And I said, okay, I'm loving this. What do you guys think? Because our decisions are usually, based on a collective sort of a sense of the work. And they both wrote back to me saying, this is totally up our alley. This is exactly the kind of poetry we love to read and we want to publish. Um, and that was it. I wrote back to her and I said, we want to do this. And I think that is the most important thing, the sense of, where there is this profound um, sense of politics and also a fair amount of philosophy. But then there's an intimacy and a feistiness and, this sense of almost being in conversation. And that is what I loved about this collection. That's why we were so thrilled to publish it. Long answer to short question, but I hope that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And coming to the collection itself, Naima, if you can tell us, who are you writing for? When you write, because this is poetry we're talking about, do you write with the audience in mind?
To be honest, no. I would say that I I have an idea of who my reader is, but when I'm writing a poetry collection, I'm writing because if I don't write it, I will die. So in terms of the audience, that's an interesting question because I think about it a lot, and it's a question that you're asked at all sessions and interviews. Um, I've never imagined my reader with a skin on. I've always imagined them as a mind and its attributes. So they're curious, they're intelligent, they don't like things spoon fed to them, and they're willing to make the journey to interpret, to make sense of a work. But if you ask me for demographics, etc., like I've seen a lot of writers and translators, they say that we translate or we write for my reader is a South Asian. I have no such demographic or no such, outward skin for my reader. And time and again, it has been proved that uh, your readership keeps growing. For example, when we finished the collection, we were sending it out for the advanced reviews. One of the first people to read it was the novelist Shazad Fatma, who wrote A Woman on a Suitcase. And I remember we were talking after that, and she said, "Naima, I enjoyed the collection. It was very desi." And I was thinking, okay, so maybe if when my other friends, some of my British friends, when they read it, they might not identify with certain things because obviously there's a lot of desiness in it. There's, I mean, I'm a desi woman. So all my experiences, I was wondering, would they be able to identify with it at any level? But when I shared it, they said exactly what Arpita just said, that the personal is political. And I think somewhere literature and poetry makes that connection that it's about a specific person in a specific culture, but it is so political and so universal that anyone can understand it. I mean, I've written poems here about my experience of being a woman in cities where women are not supposed to be in public. I have lived all my life in Lahore, yes, a brief interlude in Singapore, but in the Middle East, and those are in Saudi Arabia, no less. So those are cities which are very inhospitable to women in public spaces. And I was thinking, how can a Western woman possibly identify with it, possibly understand what it's all about? So yeah, I suppose that. Sabine, you're muted. Sabine, we can't hear you all of a sudden.
Sorry about that. Also talking about your poems, the arrangement of the poems, how are they arranged? Is there any logic to the curation? Uh, there are some 90 plus poems we're talking about. So tell us about that.
So, curation is very important for any piece of, for any book because it guides the experience, but it's critical for a poetry collection. when I started, I gave it a lot of thought. And I was like, it has to be, there have to be sections or something. But I realized when I was reading it, I realized that there was a natural flow to the poems, and very, very loosely they map a journey and an irregular arc from, you know, acknowledging or being face to face with your pain and then making peace with your body and your past and everything. It's a very loose arc. So I had wanted to get some more sophisticated level of curation in, like maybe sections and subsections, but that didn't happen. I did, however, test the collection with a lot of beta readers. I get feedback on works in progress a lot, and I never said anything about the curation, but they all found a coherence in the collection. And in a way it's a journey of healing. In a way, there's the very difficult process of looking at your pain in the face and making peace with it. And so you can't really put a pattern to it. I remember the last poem in the collection was the hardest to write. It's called Soundtrack of a Broken Home. And Arpita knows that I submitted the entire manuscript and we were in the final stages.
Mm.
And at the very end, I had written this poem, but I didn't have the courage to share. And so at the very end, after we had done the editing and all, I added that poem to the collection. And so yeah.
So,
Yeah, I
yeah.
wanted to ask, I've often wondered, Naima, I've thought of that since then. It was almost as if after I sent you the edits, uh, you suddenly decided you wanted to add that poem, and I wondered, was there anything particular that made you feel
No,
that you
no,
could add it at that point?
I suppose in a sense this collection was difficult. I've said it before, it was easy to write because I had to write it. If I didn't write it, I'd be dead. But
Mm.
it was very difficult to share. And so I suppose I had this poem, but I was like, this is too personal. I don't need to put this out. But I suppose there is, the editing process is very
Yeah,
healing in a way as well,
yeah.
because the editor is holding space for your work, and it's not just the work that goes out in pen and paper. It's not just the work that's going to take the physical form of a book, but it's also all your experiences, and the editor is looking at it without judgment, and they're telling you, all right, I see you, this could be excessive, this could be added. So I
Mm.
suppose that whole experience put me at ease, and I was like, okay, I'm putting out 90 poems. I might as well put in another one.
Yeah.
So,
And was there, Arpita, talking about the arrangement, was there any feedback or insight from your end as far as that is concerned?
Not about the arrangement per se. I like the arrangement a lot. I actually loved the fact, as I said earlier, that there were a lot of surprises along the way. I loved the way the long and the short interspersed with each other, interwove throughout the manuscript. And I also liked that there was a conversation. I mean, that's something, the arc is something we always look out for as an editor. And there have been many other manuscripts where we have gone back and said, move this one, take this later, bring this up. But here, I felt the arc made sense to me. I think I mean, for me, a lot of poetry editing is often to do with the minor detailing. So I think I went back a lot to Naima with things like punctuation or line breaks. And I think in a couple of places, I think I suggested that, as she was saying, that there was just a line more than I thought was necessary. I felt that it was ending perfectly. And then she'd added on a few more words, and I felt, can we end it here? So those were the sort of editorial sort of, tweakings, I would say, that I went back with. I think there was one where I'd suggested a different word, or, I was looking at things like, um, I mean, not that in poetry, one is very, very fluid when one comes to prepositions and conjunctions. So, but you still keep an eye out in case something is not quite making sense or there's a rhythm, a beat missing. So those are the sort of things that I went back with to Naima. It was more the micro level and the the detailing, and not so much the macro level, the bird's eye view of the arc of the manuscript. There was a story and there was a conversation which was already occurring when I read the manuscript, as far as I could see.
Interestingly, Sabine, if I can add to that,
Yeah.
many of the edits were around punctuation and the fine lines and really fine points. And as Arpita said, she was like, "This line is extra. You said it. You can remove it." There was a lot of talk about my colons. I realized for the first time that I use colons very sparingly. And every third line, Arpita's comment, "Do we need a colon here?" And then she'd be like, "Are you sure we need a colon here?" And then she's like, "Is this colon absolutely necessary?" And I was like, you know what? I need to sit down. I need to take a day off.
There
And
were
I need to,
semicolons as well.
yes, I need to think about my relationship with colons. What's happening here? So
I hear you,
Yeah.
because that's something I do. I love my colons and semicolons as well. So before we go into the first round of readings, I'd like to share a comment by Claire Chambers, who's professor of global literature at University of York. And she says Rashid's poems paint vivid portraits of characters grappling with complexities of life, love, and loss. The poet enters the intimate spaces of individuals whose lives intersect with the fabric of history, tradition, and personal struggle. This is recommended reading for poetry lovers. With this, Naima, I'd love it if you could, say a few words, do a bit of reading.
sure. So I'd like to start with some poems about motherhood. This collection as a whole is dedicated to my son, Basil. And the first poem I'll read is called Window Faced. I wrote it when he was 6 and he lost his first tooth. And I wrote the poem all those years back. I mean, he's 22 now. So I wrote it and I showed it to him, and he was 6. And I was like, "I've written a poem and it's called Window Faced. It's about you." And he was a 6-year-old who had just lost his first tooth. And I remember he was very offended because he thought I had called him a name. He was like, "Window Faced, that's really rude." But this poem, it got me on the long list for the National Poetry Competition many years down the road. So I'm not complaining. Window faced. He comes home one day, window faced, my 6-year-old, joyous at his first ever fallen tooth. The neat square of absence sitting on his face like a single window in a house from a freak fairy tale, unself conscious of its numerical oddness. It lets in the wind all unevenly, and his tongue slips into the gap all too often, slurring his speech, spilling the sounds all over, a gush of hisses and whistles slipping like minuscule pearls through the perfect square drain. Um, the next poem is about two mothers who see each other across a restaurant table, and at the different stages of motherhood they're in. It's called We Were Two Women in a Room. Across the restaurant, we were two women in a room, our lives suddenly face to face. She was feeding a second child at her breast, singing a lukewarm "Wheels on a bus go round and round," scanning the menu furtively in between. Shiva with hands in 100 places, in her mind the hissing rattlesnake of a to-do list, making her eyes senseless busy, mist-covered windows. Baggy pants, baggy shirt. I remember the time I had harbored my body in the flowing folds. I remember when that felt like the only safe place. I know by the heartache of absence now that absolute dependence of a body that came from you was bound to you, against your breast, lining the inside of your mind, wedged like a tiny nuisance between you and another who made love each night. Or was that another life? I remember the vertigo, the merciless falling through space, finding footing between losing what you thought was a thing of beauty and watching it become something from biology textbook, a vessel through which life fulfilled its purpose. I remember the strangeness of milk flowing. I remember the soreness of breast to the touch. I remember the inkwell of shame, the silence you could howl yourself force into, doors closing with nowhere to run. How cliched would it be to smile to her and say, it will go by too fast. How much he needs you now hurts nothing like how little he will need you later. You won't believe me if I tell you, but the ease of their goodbyes will break your heart. Time will free up suddenly, like a lake drying up in the sun. You'll find yourself a stupid jack in the box, grinning, head out of water at last, painted and dressed with nowhere to go, late for the show, always late for the show. That's probably how she saw it. Look at this woman, sitting in the middle of a cafe by herself like a queen, owning her solitude and her space. No children to put to sleep, no duties pulling her a million ways. What sweet freedom it could be for a woman to be this free. We were two women in a room, each looking at the other, thinking how much time had gone. The third one I have for the selection is called First Bike. Um, yeah, it talks about an interesting moment where my son got his first bike and he was very excitedly sharing it with his grandparents. And in response, they were talking about his father's first bike, so my husband's first bike. And I was like, wait a second, what's happening here? My son is talking about his first bike, and they're talking about their son's first bike, which was a good 40 years ago or something. And I felt it was a time warp. And so there's this moment that brought that gap together. First bike. At 6, he's talking still too much like birdsong. He was telling his grandparents about his first bike, accessories he was saving for, bell horn, basket, the full works. In response to his chirping, they kept answering with news of their own son's bike. My son's father, a 40 of age. As if it was fresh from last week, they told with relived regret how the bike was stolen the same week it was bought. I thought it was a sign they were going senile, this time warp they were in. Yesterday, he left for college again. Making his bed, I closed the door on his once again empty room. Wasn't it yesterday, taking the third wheel off his bike? Yesterday, his bruise from the first fall? Life's like that. You look over your shoulder, it's gone.
Thank you so much, Naima, for that. And the last poem, it feels like, the father and the son coming full circle. If there's any question or anyone wants to ask a question or perhaps share their thoughts. Okay. So, Naima, my next question for you is, I was reading again some of the reviews and talking about some of worlds, Waqas Khwaja from Ellen Douglas Professor of English, Agnes University, he said, Naima Rashid is fearless in exposing the manipulative and suffocating regimens that mark our private and public patterns of life. What I would love to hear is your views in context of your work, because indeed it is fearlessness, it's strength to be raw, to be vulnerable, but at the same time show strength as well. So Tell me more about that.
So, yeah, as we said, this book was in many ways it was a journey of healing, and we live life through so many layers of roles. Uh, we are no longer a generation who can comfortably be born in one place and then die in that same place. We don't have that, consistency of belonging, that simplicity. So we live in different cultures, and our work takes us to different places. Already, if you're a nation with a colonial history, there is already that layer of complexity added to your identity. I'm past 40 and I'm reading in Urdu and Punjabi profusely now, but I grew up reading stories which had nothing to do with the environment I was living in. And there were stories about James and Johns, and they were the stories about climates and trees, which I never saw in my surroundings. I think it's the same for everybody who was living in that culture and going to a regular English medium school. And added to that was another layer because of my career choice of teaching French, which meant that essentially around 2 decades of my life was spent in this, uh, it was a self-designed immersion that I had to create. So I was consuming media, literature, everything in French, which was, of course, a language I was teaching. So I had to be proficient in it. So the career choice justified that. But all around me in the environment, there was nothing that had anything to do with French. So there were these micro dichotomies at different levels, these gaps, and you question yourself. So I remember when I was learning French in Pakistan, and when I made the decision to learn French and then teach it, everyone from my parents to people in my circle, they were like, French? Wait a second. Who around you is speaking French? Who are you? Why should you be learning French? And why would anyone want you to teach them French? So there were all these questions. And then I went to the Middle East where, of course, I mean, look at it from their point of view. My audience was Arab. So I was a person in the South Asian skin, Pakistani, and they could tell that I'm fluent in English. I'm standing before them, teaching them French, and there were questions in their eyes like, "Excuse me, can you tell us why? Who are you? Why are you speaking French, and why are you teaching French?" So those questions, I mean, sometimes they are overtly articulated, but many times they're implied through the body language, and obviously you power through them. It's your career. It's a choice you've made. But at some point, I suppose you do ask yourself. I've always had this feeling that I'm living in one country and I was speaking in the language of another. When I was in Pakistan, I was reading and writing and speaking English and French, and now I'm in the UK and I'm reading Urdu and Punjabi. So at some point, these questions, that residue remains. You need to ask yourself, who am I? Where do I belong? Does it have to be one place? Doesn't have to be. I mean, what is home? What do you define home as? Is it a physical space? Is it a state of being? And I think the closest experience I've had to home or homecoming would be the act of translation, in which you're navigating meaning. You're trying to find some semblance of fluid truth between one frame of reference and another, and you're never really sure of having arrived. Um, yeah.
So I'm trying to formulate a question here because too many things are coming to my mind. Home, language, these are different aspects of one's being. There was a in Grey's Anatomy, in one of the episodes, there's this person, a doctor. She has a concussion, she has a head injury, and then she starts speaking in German. So what I'm trying to say, or what my question is, why do we restrict ourselves? Or why has society built these restrictions around language and what home is? Because if you can start, if the brain is attuned to speaking, even after a concussion, the person has started speaking in German or some other language. So are these just tools, I don't know if I'm
Interesting.
making myself clear.
You are. I just wish I had that, shortcut available. Unfortunately, I didn't have a concussion, so I didn't wake up speaking French. I had to spend a good decade of my life learning and slaving. So, uh, you're absolutely right, Zabeen. I think at the end of this very long, protracted journey, I have come to realize that these bifurcations or these boundaries or barriers, you belong here, you don't belong there, they were artificial. And that's why I said that for me, the closest experience of home is the act of translation, because there's always that striving, there's always that arriving towards, and you never feel that you've reached. And so I agree with you completely. All these limits, I'm not sure that society imposes them. Uh, पता नहीं, but it's self-imposed. यानी कि there's some deficiency or some gap in your understanding, जिसकी वजह से you're looking at things in black and white. Jabki they're very fluid. You can be one thing and be another, and also be another. I suppose belonging anywhere, because you do have to belong somewhere. I mean, even if it's not like a physical place, if it's not geography, like you belong to Lahore or you belong to Pakistan, it's a community. Like you belong to the community of writers. There has to be some sort of belonging for people to take you seriously. So for belonging in those circles, whether they were professional or personal, because there were so many conflicts and layers of identity. I suppose I had internalized a lot of questions and a lot of doubt around that. I do realize now that that was all artificial. Who's to say you can be anywhere and be speaking any language? Of course. And when you speak a language well, and then when you teach it well, that language becomes a part of you. You don't have to justify it with a passport. You don't have to justify it with something like a marriage certificate. When I would tell people initially there in the Middle East, that I mean, I'm teaching French. Like there wasn't a single person who did not ask me, okay, so who in your family is French? Is it your husband? Is it your father? Is it your mother? Who is it? And so they think that there has to be a stamped paper, either because I'm not French, but there has to be a stamped paper, something that certifies, okay, this is a license. This gives you permission to now teach French. Whereas I don't have to have it in my bloodline. I mean, if it's my career, I have gone through the career path, and therefore I'm teaching French. But so I suppose there are these gaps in society's understanding of belonging and maybe our own feeling about belonging, जिसकी वजह से there's a rift that needs to be addressed with some thought.
Arpita, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I completely sort of resonate with what Naima is saying. I was just thinking as she was speaking that I think one of the most wonderful things about South Asian poetry is that, we bridge these gaps just by being as bilingual and trilingual and multilingual as we are. And the more that that seeps into our writing, I think the richer our writing becomes. I mean, if I'm not, if I remember correctly, there was this one bit in Naima's poems, which has a reference to Scarlett Johansson. And then there's this other poem, which is Molvi Wali Koti. I mean, that's, for me, I mean, that's it. That this is your kind of, this is the reality of a post-colonial South Asian um, mm, persona and life. And it seeps into your writing in a way which is, which is not trying to be something that it is not, or it's not trying to wear any masks. It's letting it all sort of hang out, and I love that. And I think in my experience as a publisher, as an editor, those are the voices that I keep looking for, because I'm done with baggage heavy voices, the colonial hangover wale voices. And I really want people who can own the kind of multilinguality, multiculturality that we're all sort of living out in our lives. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Adding to
Naima,
that, Sabine,
yeah.
just adding to that, what Arpita said, कि, a South Asian household may, on an average evening when everybody's sitting together, you hear English, you hear Punjabi, you hear आपके house में कोई और language बोल रही होगी, and the quality of all those languages is excellent. South Asian children by nature, जो घर का माहौल है, they are conversant in many languages at the same time, and they're very good at it. They are natural translators. So इसमें कोई there is no shame at all. There is no embarrassment in saying this. Just like there's no pride. I remember when I used this journey of speaking French and teaching French in Pakistan, I also noticed that in a post-colonial society, this can this is a ticket to a very strange, false kind of privilege, but a very real privilege in the sense that it's a ticket that you can use to immediately arouse the complexes, the inherent complexes of people. And I realized that it's not an identity that I want to be marching forward with in my personal spaces. ये एक professional choice है, and that is that this is not something I don't want to be sitting in a group and bragging or speaking in French. What is the relevance of that? But I'm just saying that in that society, uh, आप अगर करें इस तरह if you speak English या कोई foreign language, जो गोरे की language है, एकदम से people suddenly come under pressure. And I mean, I'm just saying कि this is the reality of post-colonial societies. हमारे बच्चे conversant हैं English में, उर्दू में, पंजाबी में, सराइकी सुन रहे होते हैं. That is the beauty and the color of a day in South Asia, and you embrace it. Once again, what Arpita said about this voice, as I said, the manuscript was ready in 2017. I thought it was ready. Lekin, owning your voice without apology. Okay, you're saying something, अभी आपको एक पंजाबी, आपने ये चीज पंजाबी में कहनी है, बस कहनी है. You don't need to justify artificially. ये चीज आपने English में कहनी है. It's part of your language और उसके अंदर वो एक fluidity है. So holding space for yourself, to give yourself that permission, that is voice. Magar, I don't think you're just born into your writer's voice. It's a journey. You have to own it. Or we all go through these phases. Early drafts, I was looking at the early drafts of the poem. Many of them sounded very artificial and over edited because I was, over conscious. Okay, this has to be in English. Ye hata do, ye jumla urdu mein kyun aa raha hai and all. So yeah, finding your voice is owning that plurality and that chaos.
Absolutely. Naima, we have a question. Shandana Minas, uh, our author, dear author friend, she asked, "Your poetry is powerful and alive. Thank you for writing. Thank you for writing it. In this event, twice you've said something like you had to write or die. Does this drive your prose and translation as well as your poetry?"
Oh, Chandana, I think uh, you would agree with me that all writers feel this to some extent. But if you're talking about the forms, I think poetry is the most personal and the most visceral form of expression for me. I don't think the prose or the translation works even closely compared to that, which is why this was easy to write, but it was really hard to share because I felt that I was talking about my life in a way that I have never ever in my life spoken to anyone about, including some of my closest friends. So for me, sharing poetry felt like, putting my life out there in a very intimate, very vulnerable way. And while those other projects, translation and prose, they are very important to me, and I choose them critically. And I'm quite clear going in with the project that it's valuable for me, and I have to do this. So even if it takes like 4 years or 5 years or 10 years instead of 1 year, I will do it because it's important. But it never feels that as raw as poetry does. I hope that answers your question.
With that, Naima, should we move on to our next reading?
Sure. So I've got another. I've got some sequence of poems here which talk about the body, and how the body is a site of, it's a historical site, and you have history in the body which you can never write about in textbooks. And also how the body is a site for trauma as well as healing, and how the body has its own memory. So I've got a curation of some poems around that. The first one is Weave. It's an encounter with my mother-in-law, and she was a person who lived through the partition, and I chatted. I used to talk with her a lot. We would spend like days and nights talking about her stories and all. And the stories that she had, and the pain and the vividness with which she would relive those stories, I was like, this never is a book going to be written which will capture even 1/100th of this emotion. And she used to hold on to these fabrics and these pots and pans in this storeroom of hers. And we all used to be making fun of it all the time. Yeah, what is this junk that you're hanging on to? Take this, go beach, kabadiya go, etc. And she would like fight for those objects because for her, every single object told a story. And she was attached to them in a way that I could never understand. I live very light and, very object free. So this is, it's a poem about that encounter. Weave. Like a broker of brocades, a sea of cloth around her. It was always like this that I found her. Rosary still in hand, prayer still on lips. She was a devotee simply continuing an act of worship. I came to her temple like a heathen at a wrong address, with a kind of dread and a kind of awe. She would ease into it gently, begin unfurling the mounds of memories. The tea towels were her wedding gift from an uncle who wore the tallest turban in the village, who walked on foot in his polished black shoes all the miles to the village where he had fallen in love with a married woman, whom he ultimately made his bride. You could find them no more, these cases from Faisalabad. Her nieces had hand-woven them on a spindle. They had a rare weave. The nieces don't talk to her anymore because of a family feud. These are all she has of them. I couldn't draw that mine of memories across the mountains I have to trek and the oceans I have to sail. The sum of my life fits snugly in a North Face bag. Those pieces were not other from her. Her soul was grafted onto them. The way she would caress the cotton, slide her hands over the silk, touch the tassels of the gifted prayer rug. She was honoring the souls of the gifters, catching the breath of the parted ones, touching up in her mind the homes of those to come. And all this while I'm thinking, isn't she planting a garden of pressed flowers, plucked from between the pages of time? Why isn't she more interested in buds? A macrame that was the only adornment she could afford in their first house, which they rented at 10 rupees a month. A wedding dress with hair like golden thread at the helm, the only object she carried when they fled Ludhiana for Lahore. Embroidered platitudes she sold to make ends meet. The fabric was fraught with a fight. It held the stories she knew would never make it into history books. Her legacy was sprawled around her. The question trembled in her eyes. I couldn't bring myself to look up, lest she read that I'm no worthy caretaker of the sea of yards and yarns. My style is crossbody. I live hands-free. Um, I'll move on to the last poem in the collection. I'm just reading it. It's not the last poem that I'm reading, but it's the last one in the collection. This was the poem that I hesitated to share. And once again, it's about how your grief and your trauma can be stored in the body, and then the journey of releasing it. It's a lifelong journey. Soundtrack of a broken home. It starts as a tear, then the chasm widens. Silence is the infill for everything. What hurts, what you can't make sense of, what you hate, what won't go away. It's a silence that turns everything to stone. A silence that says it's too late for amends. Laden with the weight of wasted moments, the debris of unspoken nothings that were meant to sweeten the everyday, suddenly standing like a dam of concrete, the swell of the unsaid, pounding at the gates, tiny slips added up, each little nothing grown into its full charge of rage. Time keeps score, and the body keeps score. A perfume from a pilgrimage becomes a sculpture through neglect, lying in the same spot unnoticed, immortalizing the clumsiness of the giver and the refusal of the taker, frozen in abstraction at that tilted angle on the drawing room table, where everyone would see it several times a day, but say nothing and ask nothing. Ellipses were the coverall for question marks and full stops, missing lines of text whose whole pages left blank. Just when you think you had mastered the language of silence, that's when the screams begin. They last all life long. Um, we're talking about the body and physicality. I was thinking a lot during this selection about physical presence and how important or otherwise it is. And I was just selecting poems to read, and I realized there are two poems. One in which it's called Plasma, and it's a situation where your physical presence is the only thing that matters, and it's you know that it's the only solution to a situation. It's when many of us have aging parents. We either have gone through this experience of caring for our parents or will go through it. Um, and situations where because of economics, you're no longer living close to them, and all they crave is your physical presence. But that's the one thing that you're not able to give to them. And you have moved on to a more economically prosperous place, and you are doing better, quote unquote. And so you can buy them fancier things, better cars, bigger houses, but all they want is your physical presence. So this poem is called Plasma. Plasma. Sundown is litmus, the cruelest hour to bear. Sundown is litmus, the cruelest hour to bear. The silence can get too loud. The TV will drown the silence. The way light fell on it in that lounge like a cavern, it was always our own silhouettes we saw in the backdrop of talk shows and dramas. Our shrinking frames were drowning in that large, looming house. Sometimes we felt there was a link between the guilt of those who had left and the size of the TV screens that arrived. Fragile, they said. Handle with care. The next poem is Resident Ghost. Once again, it's about a reflection on presence, the physicality of somebody's presence. And this is a poem for a father. And I wrote the poem, and I'm just thinking: is the father's physical presence important after a certain point? They have given you so much, even when they're not there. Is that something that you can get rid of, or is that something that you can forget? And so, spoiler: the answer is no. But here's the point: Resident Ghost. Over time, the gold leaf will wither, but the imprint of letters burnt in the spine will stay. One half of a writer's life, the realm of forever. It's with humans as it is with books. A single column holds the frame in place. Have you ever tried to erase a father? Look through him like a ghost? Pretend he wasn't there? It's impossible to do. He grows back. Cut him off and you'll see it's your own limbs you lost. You are never alone when you walk. Somewhere in the back, the ghost of a father lingers, too proud for apology, too late for regress. He'll linger where you least suspect, haunt you unawares between yourself and yourself. A voice steadying your cursor as you write. A remembered tremor from a reprimanding tap. Stay a certain distance above the line. Back in the day, it was lost on you. The beauty of a calligrapher's pen and the standard of the chiseled nib. Ballpoints are suicide. You were too young to value the attention to little things, not knowing what a thing of beauty it was to have someone look that far out for you. He's a resident ghost. Listen, it's his voice in your throat as you speak to your own son, your voice steadying itself at a timbre, firm enough to keep him from falling, gentle enough to let him fly.
Sorry. So interesting. Just thinking of, home, your body, you've spoken about, these elements or these words. And I feel they're like arms, they're symbols. And, you're talking about rosary, a symbol of meditation and reflection. And, and you said something really interesting about, the body being a site of trauma and memory and history. So, and you asked the question, and I'm going to ask you back, are we worthy of that temple, of that shrine, which is marked with so much history and legacy and, trauma. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Just Sabine, writing the collection and then reading it. I mean, I often think about, how much we take our body for granted. This gift that we are given, but it's just the way it is. It's the site where, if there are emotions we can't process, we will stuff them with food, we will neglect it. And if this body was another person, that person would dump us. But we are stuck with our bodies, and I for one have had a very complicated relationship with my body. It's something that I have learned to make peace with and learned to love. It wasn't a journey. I think it's the same for many women. I mean, show me a woman who's happy with the body. There's so much trauma around you and this house that you're living life in because of whatever societal messages. And also, when you ask that question, are we worthy? It's a very latent question, Sabine, because I have learned to honor my body. I mean, it's something that we all have to do, but maybe some of us are not suffering from so much disconnect or trauma around that. But it is definitely something that I've had to grow into, and something that I have to work towards every single waking moment of my life.
Absolutely. Arpita, I'd like to ask you the same question. What are your thoughts?
Are we worthy? My gosh, I don't know. I don't know if I can answer that question. But I was just, as she was reading, I was looking at Naima's manuscript. I just opened it on my screen because there was this one which, I mean, for me, it's the body and it's the mind and all of that, the pain, but it's also about giving it back for me. Um, for instance, if you'll allow me, Naima, there's White Man. He struts into the room like he owns it, sprinkles his opinion everywhere like urine. That's the poem. And I loved it so much because for me, it's also about having um, the opportunity to say something and to say it out loud. And I don't know if I think that's basically it. Are we worthy? I don't know if I ever. I don't know. That's such a crazy question. I mean, it's important, but at the same time, I don't know if I'm worthy to answer it even. But I do know that to be able to not speak when you have the, as Faiz says, labas are there. So I just feel that to not speak, to squander that opportunity, when you've had that thought and you have the ability to express it well, that for me is a shame. I mean, I think that's how I'd answer it. I don't know if that answers your question at all.
No, absolutely, absolutely it does. And this rawness, it reminds me of something that Agatha Bhattacharya had said in one of the sessions, uh, you know, that, he said, I want to write, and I want, writing is like a jagged knife. You know, the poem you just read out, it was like that. It's like a jagged knife that pierces you, right? So that was a beautiful poem. So we'll be moving towards the end of the session. Naima, do you have, would you like to do a bit more reading?
Yeah, sure. I just would like to add to what Arpita read.
Yeah, please, yes.
The poem that she read, I remember that. I mean, it's a simple poem. There's obviously not too many words in it, but just being comfortable enough with yourself and with the person reading it, and not giving a damn. Uh, that journey is the shortest poems were really hard to write because you're like, gosh, it's like a bomb, you exploded. And you so stopping yourself from overthinking, oh my God, how's it gonna sound? Is it gonna it doesn't matter. It's gonna sound how it's gonna sound. It doesn't matter. You're not writing this to placate an audience. You're writing this because you have to write this. And people will respond to it according to their ability. So to conclude, I've got a couple of poems about, the body of a woman, being a woman and being in a body. Uh, so I have two poems which bookend the experience of being a woman. And the first is Garland. And here we meet a girl who is at the threshold of puberty. And, you see the body of a young girl. She has no self consciousness or self awareness around it. She's so much at ease with it. And then puberty hits, and then after that it's this lifelong journey towards healing. I mean, it's something that she is initially at peace with. She loves it, she's not thinking about it, but then society makes you so self-conscious, and it gives you messages of inadequacy, too black, too short, too fat, too thin, etc. We all struggle with it. There isn't a woman in the world who hasn't been traumatized by these messages. So the first poem is Garland. She's still young to it, this body that she wears like a garland. It hasn't started slashing her skin through the gaze of others. Still too early for her to tell the glint of lust apart. She wears it lightly still, twirling in its sheerness like a drape of beauty. She hasn't started paying the price for being born into it yet, bled away what must be bled to cleanse the curse. Her body is still body only. It hasn't crawled into her mind like cancer. Her step is still sprightly, a touch of spring in it, unbogged by sandbags. She skips childlike, has too much spunk to shuffle. Her waist is twist of ribbon still, unmarred by battle scars. She's still young to it, this body that she wears like a garland. Matter of time before she learns. It must be born like a cross. At the other end of the spectrum, I have a poem which is Punjaban in Calvin Klein, and that is an ode to Punjabi girl swag. And we talk about decolonizing the mind and decolonizing our syllabi, but there's also the body and these standards of beauty that we accept unwittingly or unthinkingly. I remember when I was growing up, ek hota tha standard. You would say, "Oh, you think she's beautiful? She can't fit into a pair of jeans." And now you understand the oppression and the falsity of the cruelty of those words. What is how is it a standard to be able to fit into a pair of jeans? I mean, you're from a different region, you are bigger boned, you are broader, you are built a certain way, you look a certain way, you sound a certain way. There's beauty in that. So this is Punjaban in Calvin Klein. Was that about as you hang the jeans back? That bowed head, were you thinking, I'll never fit into these? Why do you care if your contours defy the rigid geometry of borrowed wear? Why do you need to flatten your curves to fit into miniature grids? Those thighs weren't made for the clickety click of pencil heels through narrow cobblestone streets, the harried rhythm of cities on steroids. They were meant for lush green fields, verdant acres without end. They were meant for free spirited runs through fields of mango trees. Your soles kiss the soil with a settler's timeless pride, full force and gentle, in the primal touch of dust and dust, every clap a salutation, every step an act of salam. You roam the earth as if all of it was sacred turf, your ancestral playground. Your fullness is an arc drawn back to your ancestors, a life lived by the simple and visible, labor sowed and bounty reaped, the cycle of four seasons. Don't starve your spirit to fit a preset frame. You were meant for other scales, not for you sipping tea with puckered lips, holding teacups with slippery fulcrums of narrow arched handles, right hand spinky stretched. Your manna came straight from the udder. You drank bounty as white as October clouds, with froth as pearly as the waterfall's drop. You drank by the generous gulp, not the calculated sip. Your wide rimmed copper glass, cool as the shade of trees on your head, cool as the soil beneath your feet. Not for you the prudish talk, webs of malice and urban deceit. Pure hearted one, you only know how to say things as they are, the truth in your heart, spilling straight from your mouth before your mind can know.
Thank you so much, Naima, for that. It's beautiful. So I have two questions for you, Naima, and last for Arpita. But I would really like to know what your thoughts are about poetry as an act of subversion, especially in in a multipolar climate, uh, of today's world. And Arpita, same question for you as a publisher, as a writer, as a professor. So, Naima.
Sabine, I feel that, I mean, okay, this is not a debate or a question whether poetry is important. We all know it's important. But I just feel that the way we consume poetry in our daily life, it needs to get out of a book. I mean, a poetry book is just one of the many ways that poetry can be present in our lives. And a very small example of this is in UK when you take the underground, you take the tube. There are poems on the tube. So there was a campaign poetry on the tube, and you're going about your life in a regular harried London way, and you see this poem, and it changes the flavor of your day. That's just one very small example of where poetry belongs and the many ways in which it can be consumed. Reading poetry is just, I feel it's just one, yes, very important, very beautiful way, but there has to be more performance. There has to be, it has to be more present in a more physical and alive way in our day to day lives. And it's not something, it should be taken down from its pedestal. It's not something which is the domain of the select few. It is not. So I contest that notion of poetry as being, an an elite genre which can only be accessed due to some intellectual prowess or whatever. No, poetry speaks to everybody, and we need to find a way to make it a part of our everyday and take it out of the prison of books, which is just one limited way in which it can be consumed.
Arpita?
Yeah, I'm completely with Naima on this. Of course, first of all, it isn't even a question that poetry is important. Of course it is. And I think in our climate, the climate that the world is in today, I mean, it's come back in full force. How much we need poetry in our lives. Um, it's wonderful that over the last 5 years, student movements have restarted with full vigor in many parts of the world. Because there are some things that only the young can show the old or tell the old. And I think so much of the vocabulary of these movements draw on the poetry of their culture. I mean, whether you look at, the anti-CA protests here, or you look at um, Aurat marches in Pakistan, or you look at the movement in Iran after Mahsa Amini's death, or you look at Black Lives Matter, or of course, more recently, I mean, the movements across campuses across the world in favor of Palestine. I mean, to end genocide in Palestine. I think we've all gone back to poetry in that sense, and spoken poetry. We've all gone back to the power of reciting it in real time at that moment. And that's why, again, I'm completely with Naima on that one, that I think reading, yes, but exchanging and reciting and speaking out loudly, and saying in a very, very clear way that poetry is for everyone, poetry belongs to everyone. That's so, so important for our times, particularly for the young.
Absolutely. Two more questions. um, so, Naima, you talk about loss, you talk about death, you talk about hatred as darkness, and at the same time, you poetically approach them as human elements that connect one another, the self, the individual, and the individual in a society. So, how, in your opinion, do these elements cultivate one's ability to make sense of oneself?
Hmm. Um, if I understand the question correctly, Sabine, you'll tell me when I answer.
Sure.
Um, I am not afraid of any of these negative things. I am not afraid of loss, grief, pain at all, because all of that, the trek through that, and finding some peace, finding uh, hope in the world, at the end of that, for me, that's the meaning of life. I don't want anything spoon fed to me. I don't want anything that comes without a challenge. So for me, all of this, ये जो भी है, ये hatred या negativity, ये differences, this is a part of life. I'm not
True.
woke in the sense that uh, I feel we were talking about this the other day as well. Sabine,
Yeah.
when you would ये challenge, ये stress, this is life. This is a part of life. This is something you have to learn how to handle. And वो जो एक happiness का pandemic है, you have to be happy all the time. I mean, please, I don't know. For me, ये जो rhythm है, grief की, loss की, pain की, self negation से self acceptance की journey, for me ये पूरी rhythm जिंदगी है.
Yeah.
इसमें से कोई चीज unwanted नहीं है. There's nothing that is unwanted. Death is a part of life. I think it's the only reality of life. So why do we grieve so much? What's the reason to mourn? It's the only fact that we know for sure when we are born. And then when somebody
Exactly.
dies, we pretend कि ओहो ये तो पता ही नहीं था. तो कैसे नहीं पता था? पहले दिन से यही तो पता था सिर्फ. How do you live a life forgetting every day, every second that you're going to die? I lost both my parents in law in the past 5 6 years, and I was thinking a lot about this because I was very close to them, and I used मेरी उनके साथ बड़ी अच्छी relationship थी, और I used to talk a lot with both of them. बहुत कहानियां थी उनके पास. And I saw this whole क्या कहना चाहिए, the social performance around death, and I used to wonder कि, they lived beautiful, healthy, happy lives, mashallah. They both went in their 80s. तो यानी कि डेथ हो जाती है, लॉस हो जाता है, ये जिंदगी का हिस्सा है. These are realities. I'm not interested in dodging these realities. I'm not interested in sugarcoating them. this is life for me. This is the essence of life. Hatred कह लो या जो भी आपने बोला, negativity, differences. ठीक है, ये journeys हैं. You go through it and you come out stronger. It makes you who you are. None of it is something that I want to. If I was to live my life all over again, there's nothing I would edit out. This would be.
I've been thinking about this a lot these days, because you know we were talking about unraveling. There's an unraveling that happens after 40, and I've been thinking.
Oh, the unraveling after 40. I'm like, okay,
Exactly.
Sabir. All right.
So I'm just thinking, darkness, um, is it really negative or just the flip side of the coin? Uh, Grief, it's our companion. Um, so I don't know, why do we tag or restrict darkness to something which is dark? Because maybe darkness जो है वही हमारी journey, you know if you're going to discover yourself, you need that darkness. I don't know if I'm making always muddled thoughts. Okay.
Total sense. And बिल्कुल, that is exactly what it is. ये yin yang क्या है जो, I mean, it's going to be so cliched when I say this. The yin and the yang, जो light and shadow होता है, जो कहते हैं ये, I mean, spiritual या जो self development वाले जो literature में जो कहते हैं discovering your shadow self. Yes, okay, fine, it's a cliche, but it's true, भाई. आप nobody is perfect. Life isn't perfect. हर situation के अंदर ये darkness होती है. And these are beautiful experiences. ये कब decide हुआ था कि when was this decided कि happiness is good and darkness is unacceptable, or it's no. I mean, I feel embracing and going full, going in with a full embrace of all these states. For me, that's life. I mean, I don't want to live another way. वो क्या है वो जिंदगी जिसमें there's artificial, happiness, or things are, artificially seamless. No, this is life. The irregularity, the pain of it. So yeah, the heartbreak. What's life without
Absolutely.
heartbreak?
Absolutely. Arpita, I'd like to ask you the same question, plus an important one. You are one of those visionaries who are leading when it comes to cross-cultural exchange. Um, so, what is the impact and what is the role of cultivating these relationships, these cross-cultural, bridging the divide and all that? So, yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if I can add to what Naima said earlier, because she said it so eloquently. I mean, I can't understand people who say why do we have to dwell on darkness? But then I'm Bengali. We are born into cinema and poetry, music, which is, uh, you know, full of the melancholia, which I, like Naima, believe springs from, knowing the minute you're born that the only thing one knows is that you're going to die. I mean, so of course there's melancholia. I mean, how are you going to get away from it? And the second thing is, of course, the fact that there is also the world we're living in, and the state of the world we're living in. And while I often, uh, you know, uh, take issue with a lot of people who say, "Oh, there was the golden era and now it's all terrible," because I don't believe that either. I think there are cycles, and I think this golden era rubbish, what it does is normalizes a lot of gatekeeping and classism, casteism that happened in the past, which actually is at least being made visible now. So I don't live in that halcyon era nonsense narrative, but I do feel that at least in some, in with respect to just one thing, which is what we are doing to our environment, and all the politics associated with that. And there's so much, across uh, uh, military politics to social justice to um, mining to what we're doing to First Nations people across the board. And how, in a lot of ways, it's reached a sort of uh, a point that feels almost of no return, you know. And in that sense, at least, for sure, I also feel we are at a point of crisis. And if we are also talking cyclically, again, we are at that point of crisis, where perhaps the world found itself 100 years ago in terms of the entire world. So, in that sort of a situation as well, I can't understand people who will say, why dwell on darkness? Why dwell on, you know, talking about what's wrong? Because that is speaking truth to power. Um, the other thing you asked, I mean, is connected, correlated to this, because I mean, the pandemic taught us that. Perhaps, since the Second World War, nothing else had affected the world so completely and so much at the same time, simultaneously. And how much we sort of, kind of drew some sanity. Those of us who had the privilege, of course, because those who didn't were, trying to walk back to their villages because we didn't bother to give them local transport or even interstate transport. But that's another story. But at least those of us who had privilege, we connected with people across borders, across boundaries, across time zones, because that was something that gave each other hope. And there was also this sense of, we are not alone in the situation. And I think that's true now of so many issues. I mean, we have just published this book on the woman life freedom movement in Iran. And I was so sure that this is the right moment for us to publish this book in India. There was not a question in my mind. 5 years ago, maybe I would have thought, will I be able to, is this a book that we'll be able to market or to really promote and make sure it gets its due, because it's a wonderful book. But at this moment, I don't have any doubt in my mind, because everything feels so connected, and everyone is so connected in this moment of crisis almost that we are in, and we're looking to each other for some, I don't know, solutions is too big a word, but for just some hope, some sliver of, possibility that there is a way out, or that there is something we can all do collectively and on our own, to get past this crisis or to survive this sense of crisis. So yeah, I mean, hope, you know, hope springs eternal from cross-cultural exchanges of this sort. And you're such an important part of this for this part of the world and the Middle East, and also women from African countries. And we all meet at your event and your events. And it really, for me, these are things that I really look forward to, because a lot of days, a lot of moments and weeks and days and months go by when you're feeling only demoralized these days. Yeah. Sorry, again, long answer, but
No,
what
no.
do you do?
First of all, thank you so much. But, we as a collective, honestly, we do this, this is how magic is created. We do it together, Arpita. Um, and our festival would be, in April, third week of April, we're planning again. So be
Looking
prepared.
forward to that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. If there's any question, uh, now is a good time. Let me see. Let me check.
There's one from Shabana.
Yeah.
About
Yeah.
from Farah Ali.
Yes.
Mhm.
So let me read it out. It's, hi Naima. This is from Farah Ali. Hi Naima, would love to know something about your editing process. How do you approach it? Do you trust your first instinct in that first draft, or do you give it time before redrafting?
Um, uh, it works so far, Farah. It works very differently for me in poetry and prose. In poetry, I trust my instinct, and there's generally very little editing to do, except at a final level when the manuscript is with the publisher. Self editing बहुत कम होती है. Prose में अभी, because I'm still working through my first novel and my short story collection. Prose में अभी I need a fair bit of editing, redrafting. I mean, I know because you've gone through two finished works. I know that the number of finished works you've gone through, which are out in the world, just say आप पूरी journey से गुजरे होते हैं, that really adds to your confidence. Like in translation, for example, I'm at a very different level than now than I was before my first project, because I've gone through four projects in translation. So yeah, for poetry, I trust myself. There's very little self-editing. मगर prose में मुझे अभी काफी editing की जरूरत होती है, and I'm guessing that will change after more finished works are out in the world.
Great, thank you. Any last words, Arpita, Naima?
Just a huge thank you to you, Sabine, and to Arpita for making time. I loved this session. It felt like therapy.
Yeah, I wanted to say
Yes,
the
but-
same thing. It's been a tough week for me. Um, Tough since the weekend, and it was really lovely to do this today. I really needed this. I really needed to feel held in this way. And also, how lovely is it to hear poetry recited by the poet? Always,
Yes.
always a sublime experience. Thank you for that time.
Pleasure. And thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
so much.
Trust
Thank you so
support.
much for being here, both of you, and our audience in the Zoom session and outside it as well. Thank you so much. Let me just stop the live stream first.